How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Ayin Ches, Daf 78 of Masechta Gittin. Friends, what do you want me to tell you about Daf 78? It's a good daf. It's not the shortest daf, I guess, because you got like on Amud Aleph, you got that big chunk of like medium-sized lines. So it's not the shortest daf, but it's not like super hard. It's basically like, it's a daf of Gemara. What do you want me to tell you? Well, then we'll get up to the next Mishnah, which is right at the top of Ayin Tes Amud Aleph. So really just a daf, a basic daf of Gemara, you know what I mean? Alright, let's do it. We're going to start in Daf Ayin Ches Amud Aleph, third line of the daf. Afiluhu ima b'mita v'chulei. So we had said in the Mishnah that if she's in her house, then he can give her the get. If she's in his house, then he can't give her the get, even if they're in the same bed. Okay? So but that's only if it's his bed. So she's in his house, in his bed, so then, yeah, that wouldn't work. But if she's in her bed, even though it's in his house, migoreshes, then she would be divorced. We're also learning a brayso like this. Rabbi Eliezer says, Rabbi Eliezer b'mita shelo in migoreshes, that she's not divorced if it's his bed. B'mita shelo migoreshes. But if it's her bed, so then she is divorced. B'mita shelo migoreshes. 1 second. So we're saying that if he puts the get on her bed in his house, she's divorced. Kelyo shalokeach b'shus mocher hu. But that's the vessel of a buyer in the domain of the seller. Meaning, if I understand correctly, what we're trying to compare it to a situation where if I go into a supermarket with a vessel and I take some eggs and I put it in my vessel, are they mine now? Because I took something and I went into somebody else's store, took something, put it into my vessel, so now it's mine, but it's not. I'm in somebody else's store. So it's the kelyo shalokeach, the vessel of the purchaser, in the domain of the seller. So shmas mina, from the fact that if he puts the get on her bed, which is in his house, she's divorced. Well, that sounds like we can conclude from there. Kelyo shalokeach b'shus mocher, the vessel of a buyer in the domain of the seller, kana lokeach, it now belongs to the buyer. If I walk into a store, take an item, put it into my vessel, so now it's mine now. It's no longer the seller's. So we say no, do not conclude that. Do not conclude that a buyer can acquire something by simply putting it into his vessel inside somebody else's store. No, that doesn't work. The reason why putting it on her bed, which is in his house, is effective is, where am I? Because it was 10 tfachim tall. And of course, as we know from Masechta Shabbos and Masechta Eruvin, probably Masechta Sukkah also, something that is, 10 tfachim tall is its own rishus, right? It's a rishus hayochid. It's 10 tfachim tall, right? So it will be if it's 4 tfachim, I think if I remember correctly, 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim at a height of 10 tfachim is its own rishus, and therefore it's her rishus, and therefore that's why she's divorced. Ve'ika mikom kare. But what about the fact that the legs of the bed are, in his domain? Amkom kare lo kapti inshe. People aren't super makpid on places where the legs can stand. That's pretty minor bit, and Rashi points out it's 10 tefachim. The bed is 10 tefachim tall. It's got some legs that are not taking up much space, and under the bed, because it's 10 tefachim tall, you can use that area. So therefore, he's not going to be makpid, and if he puts the get on her bed, she would be divorced. The socheka o the soch kalasa migoreshes. If he puts the get in her lap or into her sewing basket, migoreshes, she is divorced. Amai, why is she divorced if he puts the get into her sewing basket? It's the vessel of a purchaser in the domain of the seller, right? It's her basket in his house. How does that make her get divorced? Amr Rav Yehuda Amr Shmuel Kigon Shaisa Kalasa Tluyaba. Well, the basket was hanging from her, so therefore it was like part of her body. What's the word I'm thinking of? Part of her person. I think that makes sense. It was part of her person, I guess. Oichid says Rabbi Elazar Amar Boshaya that it was hanging from her. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar Kshura Alpha Pishena Tluya. Even if it's tied, even if it's not dangling, but like it's just tied with a rope, and she's like, she's like walking around schlepping the basket on the floor like it's it's on a leash. Even so, if he puts the get in the basket, she's divorced. That the basket was between her thighs. I don't know, I'm imagining she's like, sitting cross-legged on the floor, and the basket is between her legs, and the get is put in there, so that's fine. Because the whole place where she's sitting is considered hers. Rav Misharsha bar Rav Dimi Omer, Gonchaisa Baila Mocher Kalosos. Says Rav Misharsha bar Rav Dimi, well, it's talking about a situation where her husband sells these baskets, and therefore, it's just, these baskets, he's not makbid on the place where all these baskets are, including hers. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Makom Cheka Kanila, Makom Kalasa Kanila. Rabbi Yochanan says that, look, just like, any place that she occupies in the house is considered, like that place would be considered hers, for that, at least the time being. So wherever her basket is as well is considered hers, right? Meaning a husband understands that, like, his wife takes up space, and that applies to her person. It also applies to her basket. Like people have baskets or tote bags. Fine. So kanila, so makom kalasa kanila. Amirav my time with Rabbi Yochanan. How come Rabbi Yochanan says this? Lefisha in other makbid lo makom cheka lo makom kalasa. That a fellow is not going to be makbid on the space that his wife takes up with her lap where she's sitting, or where her tote bag is. Tanam Yachi, also in a brice like this, Zrako la l'soch chika, if he threw it into her lap, o l'soch kalasa, or into her basket, o l'soch kol davar shehu ki kalasa, or anything that's like this basket. Hare zo migoreshes, she is divorced. Kol davar shehu ki kalasa li'isuyimai. What does it mean? When we say and also anything that is like a basket, like such as what? What's an example? Li'isuya taska dachla batamri. Like a little pouch that you eat dates with. That too. So the point is that, a fellow knows that his wife has stuff, and those stuff, is considered like, hers, and if the get is put into any of those things, that would be considered like she received it, and she is divorced. Says the Mishnah, Omer lo kansi shtar chov zeh. If the husband says, here, take this financial document. Oshim also me'achor. 1 second, there are people talking outside while I'm trying to record Babylon Talmud. Let me try to understand what's so important for them. I can't decipher what they're talking about, so I don't know what's so important to them. But the only thing I could say is that they're trying to bother me. They know that I'm recording Babylon Talmud, and they're trying to bother me. But luckily, I was fortunate enough in my life to have met a fellow named Yanki Lazar, and he told me that it's all in my head. So we're going to go weiter. So if he finds so if he says to her, here, take this financial document, or that she found it behind him, Korah, so then she reads it, and she's like, holy smokes, this is a divorce document, ain't no get. So she's not divorced, right? Meaning he gives it to her and says it's a financial document, or she takes it from behind him and it turns out that it's a get. She's not divorced. Until he says to her, this is your get, even if it's after the fact, right? Meaning, right, he could say, here's a financial document, and then she reads it and she's like, wait, this is a get, and he's like, hey gitech, that also works. Nosan biyada v'yeshena, if he puts it in her hand, but she's sleeping right now, ne'ora, then she wakes up, kora barei hu gita, and she reads it, and it's like, holy smokes, this is a get. Eino get, ad she'omer lo hey gitech. So she's not divorced until he says to her, hey gitech, this is your get, and then she'll be divorced. Ki omer la, hey gitech, my have, but I don't understand. When she picks up the get from behind him, and then she reads it, and it turns out it's a get, and he says, hey gitech, what's the difference? Havle tli gitech me'al gabe karka. She picked it up off of the ground. Ve'omar rave tli gitech me'al gabe karka lo amar klum. And when he says to her, pick up the get from off the ground, he doesn't give it to her, he doesn't put it in her hand, right? We need v'nosan biyada, as we're about to see, right? He has to put it in her hand. He's not putting it in her hand, he's saying you pick it up off the floor. So here also, if she's picking it up from behind him, why does it work? Even if he then says, hey gitech. Ema sheshalafto me'achorav. So it's talking about where it was between, he had put the get between his belt and his loins, and she pulled it out from between his belt and his loins. Shalafto nami habayinam v'nosam biyadot. But even if she pulled it out from between his belt and his loins, but you still need v'nosam biyadot. He has to put it in her hand. She can't just pull it out from between his belt and his loins. So v'leka, and that didn't happen here. He didn't put it in her hand. Lo tzricha de'arak la chartze v'shalaftia. It's talking about where he stuck out his loins, and then she pulled it out. So it's ki'ilu, he gave it to her. Tananami Achin. We also learn in a brayso like this that it's talking about where he put it between his belt and his loins. We learn in a brayso like this. Amar la. By the way, what are loins? I feel like loin. Does anybody know what loins are? I feel like it's like this enigma. It's, you kind of have an idea, a general idea of what they are. I can't tell you for sure what loins are, but I'm pretty sure I know which section of the body it's in. It just feels like it should be there. But I can't say exactly what loins are. I don't know. Alright. Gird your loins. Alright. If he says, take this financial document, or if she grabbed it from between his belt and his loins, karato, and then she reads it, hu gita, and it turns out that it's her divorce document. Ain't no get. She's not divorced. It's not a get. She's not divorced. Until he says to her, hey, gitech, here is your get. If you're Rebbe, that's Rebbe's opinion. Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer, but says Reb Shimon ben Elazar, l'olam ain't no get. It is not a get. He has to take it back from her, and then give it to her a second time, and this time say to her, hey gitech, this is your get that I'm giving you. If he gives it to her and she's sleeping, Ne'ora, and then she wakes up, Vikora, and she reads it, Varehu Gita, and it turns out it's a get. Eino get, it's not a get, it doesn't work. Ad Shiyomarla, until he says to her, hey Gitech, here is your get. Rebbe, that's Rebbe's opinion. Reb Shimon ben Elazar, Omer says, Reb Shimon ben Elazar, Ad Shit Lenu, he has to take it back from her, V'yachsu V'yitnenula, and then re-give it to her, V'yomarla, and say to her, hey Gitech, this is your get. Utzricha, and we need both cases. We need the case of the loins and the case of the sleeping. If we only have the case of the loins, that's where Rebbe says that he doesn't have to re-give it. Because she's somebody who's able to receive a get, right? She's awake right now. If he gives her the get properly, she'll be divorced. He gave it to her improperly, so he just needs to say, look, hey gitech, and then that kind of fixes it. But when he gives it to her and she's sleeping, a sleeping woman cannot get divorced. You have to wait till she wakes up. So Ema Modi le Reb Shimon ben Elazar, I might think that Rebbe agrees with the Shimon ben Elazar that in that case, when he gave it to her when she's sleeping, so then he would have to take it back from her and re-give it. So Kamash Malon, that no, Rebbe says even when he gives it to her when she's sleeping, he just needs to say hey gitech, and that's enough. V'yitmar be'ha, and if we would only have the case of the sleeping, be'ha ka'am Reb Shimon ben Elazar, that's what Reb Shimon ben Elazar says. I might say that that's what Reb Shimon ben Elazar says, that you have to re-give it because she was sleeping at the time that he gave it to her the first time, and she can't receive it again when she's sleeping. Aval bahach. But in the first case of the loins, ema modile l'Rebbe, I might say that in that case, she's already awake. Maybe he just needs to say hey gitech tzricha. Therefore, we have to clarify that the machlokas is in both of the cases by when she's sleeping as well as when she takes it from between his belt and his loins. Amar Rava, says Rava, kosav la get unisanu biad avda. If a husband writes a get and then he gives it to her eved, Now her eved is her property. So it's like he puts it in her chotzer. Yashen, now if he is sleeping, umishamarto, and she's guarding him, harez a get. So then it is a good get, right? So, giving it to the eved when the eved is sleeping and she's guarding the eved, so then be'etzim, it's like he puts it in her chatzer, and that's fine. But neyor, if he's awake, eino get, then it doesn't work as a get, because that's like a chatzer that is being guarded without her knowledge, right? Meaning an eved is a human being, and a human being has their own da'as, and therefore, when he gives it to the eved and the eved is awake, it's not the woman who's guarding the get, it's the eved who's guarding the get, and that's a chatzer hamishtamer shelo l'daita, right? He's guarding his own, he's taking care of his own guarding. But Yashin Ushamarta Areza get amai. But one second, but even if the eved is sleeping, why does that make a difference? Chatzur ma'alechasi. An eved is a chatzur ma'aleches, is a chatzur that's able to move. The chatzur ma'aleches lokano. And a chatzur that can move, because an eved of course can move, does not make it, you can't make a kinyan there. V'chitema Yashin shiny, maybe you'll say, yeah, but it's different because he's sleeping and therefore he's not moving. But Rava says that when it's moving, it doesn't work. So even when it's staying still or sleeping, it can't be kones. So therefore, I don't care that the eved happens to be sleeping right now, but he still can't be kones since it's a chatzur ma'aleches. Well, we're talking about where he's tied up and he actually can't go anywhere. So he's considered like a chatzur that doesn't move and is not going anywhere, and he's sleeping, so he doesn't have his own das. So therefore, in that case, she would be divorced. Okay. Next Mishnah. If she was standing in Rishus Arabim, Uzrako la, and he threw it to her, he threw the get to her, Karov la, if it is closer to her, Migoreshes, she is divorced. Karov lo, if it's closer to him, well then Eina Migoreshes, she's not divorced. Mechta, if it's halfway, Migoreshes, Veina Migoreshes, then it's a suffix. V'chein in Kiddushin, the same thing applies to Kiddushin, right? If he throws Kesef Kiddushin to her, if it's closer to her, if it's closer to him, if it's in the middle. Friends, we're starting Masechta Kiddushin, Starting Masechta Kiddushin, 12 days. Starting Masechta Kiddushin. The last Masechta in Seder Noshim. Friends, we're moving. After Gittin, Chevre, I think after Gittin, we're halfway through Shas, Chevre. It's not a perfect science, I bet, but, as I think I've mentioned before, like this series of the Gemara that I learned from, the mini-series, it's 20 books, and this is book 10. So, at least according to that, 10 is halfway to 20. Fine. And similarly, with regard to money owed. If Ruvain owes Shimon $1,000, Amar lo Bal Chova, if Shimon says, Zrokli Chovi, just throw me the $1,000, Uzrako lo, and Ruvain throws him the $1,000, and then it gets lost. So Karav Lamalva, if it had landed closer to Shimon, Zacha Amalva, so we treat it as though Shimon had received it, and therefore Ruvain is off the hook. Karav Lelova, but if it landed closer to Ruvain and then got lost, Halov period. So then Ruvain is going to have to pay back, still on the line for $1,000. But if it's halfway in the middle, then Ruvain and Shimon will divide it up. We'll share the responsibility for it. So now the Gemara wants to explain to us, what does it mean that it's closer to her, closer to him, in the middle? Somewhat interesting. What's considered closer to her? What's considered closer to him? Amar Rav, says Rav, if it's within 4 amos of her, right? So he throws it and it lands within 4 amos of her. So then it is that's closer to her. Arba amos shelo. If it's within 4 amos of him, well then it is closer to him. Zeu karav lo, that's closer to him. Heichi dami mechza amechza. What is when it's in the middle? Amar Shmuel by Rav Yitzchok, ki gon she'ayu shneien omdin be'arba amis. Well, what if they were standing 7 amas away from each other, and the get is right in the middle at the 4th amma? Now that 4th amma is within 4 amos of both of them. So therefore, because it's within 4 amos of both of them, so then it's a suffix. But why don't we just see that which one got to within 4 amos of the get first, right? Maybe right now they're both within 4 amos of them, but they weren't, somebody must have gotten there first. If you say no, they mamish both got to within 4 amos at the of the get at the same time. Come on. It's impossible that they can mamish get there at the same split second. Somebody must have gotten there first. Rather says Rav Kahana, what we're talking about is when they're not 7 amos away from each other, they're 8 amos away from each other. And the get is smack in the middle, partially within his 4 amos, partially within her 4 amos, and in that case it's a suffix. To which the Gemara says, what's the suffix? She's obviously not divorced in that case. Part of the get at least is still within 4 amos of him, which means that he didn't entirely give it to her. So obviously she's not divorced in that case. Rather say Rabbi and Rav Yosef, the suffix is when you have 2 groups of witnesses. What? This is basically the same thing as fellow and fella, lo and la. Same idea. Lo, la, fellow, fella, fellow, fella, lo, la, fellow, fella, lo, la, fellow, fella, lo, la. Got it? You're never going to forget that now. If the Gemara can use lo and la, I can use fellow and fella. There you go. If you were wondering, if you thought maybe it's a little confusing when I say fellow and fella, you know what I mean? I didn't start. I wasn't the first to do it. The Gemara itself does it. Fellow, fella. So when you have 2 groups of witnesses, one group says it's closer to her, one group says it's closer to him, that's when we have a suffix. Rabbi Yochanan Omer says, Rabbi Yochanan, Karuv la shaninu, afilu mea ama. Okay. When it says that it's closer to him, it could be even 100 amas away. The Karuv la, when it's closer to her, it could be even 100 amas away. The Karuv la shaninu, afilu mea ama. Closer to him, it could be even 100 amas away. What's considered in the middle? So Rav Shimon bar Abba says, Rav Shimon bar Abba, the didim mefarshli mini de Rabbi Yochanan. So it says Rav Shimon bar Abba, look, it was explained to me what Rabbi Yochanan is saying. He who yachol l'shomro, v'hi enu yachol l'shomro. Look, if he is able to guard it, but she's unable to guard it, so karuv lo, then it's considered closer to him, right? So meaning, if the get is technically further away from him than from her, but there's an important but, which is there's a river between her and the get, and there's no obstacles between him and the get. So even though technically it's closer to her than to him, but she can't actually get it easily, and he could. And she can't actually guard it. If a bird comes and scoops it up, she'll not be able to do anything about it. Whereas he can, I guess chase after it, or a dog, he can, because he has access to it, he can actually protect it, right? And she can't. So even though it's closer to her, technically, in terms of distance, but practically speaking, she has no access to it. So therefore it would be considered closer to him. So again, right? Hu yachol l'shomro, if he can guard it, v'hi enu yachol l'shomro, and she's unable to guard the get, well then zeu karuv lo would be considered, at the end of the day, closer to him. He yachol l'shomro, v'hu enu yachol l'shomro. If she's able to guard it, but he is unable to guard it, well then zeu karuv lo. That would be considered closer to her. Shneim yicholin l'shomro, if they're both able to have access to it. Shneim ein yicholin, or both are unable to have access to it. Well then zeu mechza al mechza, then that is what it means by we're uncertain who it is actually closer to. Amar Rabban Kamed Rabbi Yochanan, the rabbi said this pshat in front of Rabbi Yochanan, Mishmei de Rabbi Yonasan, in the name of Rabbi Yonasan, Hachi Amar, wait, what? Amar Rabban Kamed Rabbi Yochanan, Mishmei de Rabbi Yonasan, Hachi, like this. Amar, so Rabbi Yochanan said, Yodin Chevin Bavloi, our Babylonian friends, because Rabbi Yonasan came from Bavel, to Eretz Yisrael, Lefrushe, Ki Aitama, they know how to explain properly. Tan Ram Yochanan, we also learn in a Bryce like this, Rabbi Eliezer, says Rabbi Eliezer, Kolshu Karov Lo Milo, even if it is closer to her than it is to him, but Uva Kelev Unitalo, but a dog comes and takes it, Eina Migoreshes, she's not divorced. Eina Migoreshes, what do you mean she's not divorced? When it lands closer to her, she's divorced. So what does it mean that if the dog now scoops it up, she's no longer divorced? She just has to guard it forever, and if it gets lost, she's no longer divorced? No. This is what it means. Even if it's closer to her than it is to him, but if a dog were to come and scoop it up, and he would be able to guard the get, she'd be useless, she'd be unable to guard it. She's not divorced, because even though it's technically closer to her, if she's unable to protect it, but he is, then it's not considered closer to her, and therefore she's not divorced. This says Shmuel to Rav Yehuda Shinina, sharp one, of course, right? Shmuel calls Rav Yehuda the sharp one. That it's considered closer to her if she could bend down to pick it up, that close. But nonetheless, but Shmuel instructs Rav Yehuda, but nonetheless, even if it reaches so close that she could bend down and pick it up, we need for him to place it in her hand. That is the surest way that we know that it's done properly. Make sure that the husband places the get in the hand of the wife. That's what you should be doing. Amar le Rav Mordechai Rav Ashi have uvda hachi vatzuchur chalitza. There was episamaise where there was a maise where the get landed close to her, and then the guy died, and we had her do the vatzuchur chalitza. They had her do chalitza, out of concern, because maybe she is divorced, maybe she isn't divorced. They had her do chalitza. All right. In Kiddushin, and we said that just like this, closer to him, closer to her, in the middle thing applies to a get, it also applies to Kiddushin. Amar Vasi, Amar Yochanan, Legittin Amar V'lolo Davar Acher. Says Rabbi Asi in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that this, closer to him, closer to her stuff is specifically by Gittin, but not by anything else. But Rabbi asked Rabbi Asi, I don't understand. What about our Mishnah? V'chein Linyan Kiddushin. Our Mishnah says that the same applies to Kiddushin Oichit. Shiny awesome. It's different when it comes to Kiddushin, because by there, Tichsiv Yotzav Ha'isa. Makish Avoya Liyitzir. Makish Yitzir La'avoya. Makish Avoya Liyitzir. I think that's the way to say it. That we compare Kiddushin to Gittin. Right? It says V'yotzav Ha'isa. The Pasuk says V'yotzav Ha'isa. And therefore we compare Gittin to Kiddushin, or Kiddushin to Gittin. And therefore, just like by Gittin, if it's closer to her, there's closer to her, closer to him in the middle. So the same thing would, right? That's by Gittin. So the same thing applies to Kiddushin as well, because of the Gezeres HaKosov. Eisvei. But what about V'chein Linyan Achov? What about the fact that the Mishnah says that it doesn't just apply to Gittin and Kiddushin, but Oichit by Chovis. Oichit by when Reuben owes Shimon money. Zrok li Chovi. If Shimon says to Reuben, throw me the $1,000, Uzrakolo, and Reuben throws Shimon the $1,000, Karev Lemalve, Zocha Halove. It's interesting. The Mishnah said the opposite, but I think the sentiment is the same. That if it is closer to Shimon, so then Reuven, wins in that he's no longer responsible for the $1,000 when it gets lost. Karev Lelove, but if it lands closer to Reuven, Halove Chayev, so then Reuven will be Chayev to, pay for that $1,000 that got lost. Mechza al mechza, but if it lands in the middle, Shneim Yachloku, then they have to bear the responsibility together. So we see that this closer to him, closer to her thing doesn't just apply to Gittin and Kiddushin, but Oichid by Chovis. So Achav Mayaskinon, here what are we dealing with? The Amar Le, Zrokli, Chovit Viti Potter. Well, this is talking about where Shimon specifically says an important word, Viti Potter. Throw me the $1,000 and you'll be exempt. So because if he would just say throw me the $1,000, then it's not this, closer to him, closer to her thing, or, closer to Reuven, closer to Shimon thing. But because he specifically says throw it to me and then you'll be off the hook. So because of that, that's why, if it lands closer to Shimon, then he's off the hook. Then Reuven's off the hook. If that's the case, what's the chiddush? If he's saying throw it to me and be potter, so of course it will be potter when you throw it. No, he said throw me the money just like you'd throw a get. But still, what's the chiddush? Okay, so you're saying throw me the money like you throw a get. I.e., if it's closer to me, then you don't have to worry about it anymore. Well, maybe Shimon would be able to say to Reuven, I was just joking. Kamashmalan, you can't say that. You can't. It's not a funny joke. Friends, I saw a poster just before. It's funny, I saw a poster before about some comedians or something that they're gonna be being, telling jokes in some place. It's funny. I recognized somebody on that poster. I said, "Oh, I know who that is." I didn't realize it was funny. It's funny when you all of a sudden find out that somebody became a comedian. It's like, and you had no clue he was funny. All right. I once was watching a video of some comedian, a long time ago. I was like, wait, I know that guy. He's not funny. I don't think he was funny. All right. Amar of Chizda, but I guess anybody could be a comedian. No, I'm not saying that like anybody could do it. No, I never tried to do it. I've thought about it, of course, but I'm sure it would be a ton of work. You have to, it's not easy to be funny, right? You have to come prepared. No, so what I was saying is anybody can be, anybody could be anything they want to be, right? Amar of Chizda says of Chizda, get biyado, mishich biyado. You hear this? This is funny. That if he gives her the get, but is attached to a string. Now that's funny. He gives her a get, and it's attached to a string. So im yochol inasko lavio etzla, if he could pull it and it comes back to him, ein megoreshes, she's not divorced. V'im la, but if he can't, then megoreshes, she is divorced. My time outcome being kresus v'leka. We need it to be a separation. It's not much of a get if you can always yank it back. All right. I'm review this as a reader. Haisa yada asuya kikatapres. If her hand was like dead fish, it was tilting downwards. So basically, there was no way to really receive it. Uzrakola, and he throws it to her, and predictably it hits her hand and falls on the floor. Afalpisha gia get liyada ena megoreshes. Even though he threw the get, it landed by her hand, but then it fell down because her hand was like on a downward slant. She's not divorced. Amai, how come? But it's going to land within 4 amos of her. Why is she not divorced? Bidelo, no. It's talking about where it didn't land. They got, it fell from her hand, and she never received it because it was on like a slant. And then before hitting the ground, it got burnt up. Vitigarish me'avir the arba amos. But still, shouldn't it be enough that it's within the airspace of the 4 amos? That once it enters into the airspace of her 4 amos, shouldn't that be enough that she should be divorced? Tifshot debai Rabbi Lazar. So if we're saying no, then we should have an answer for Rabbi Lazar's question. That when they talk about these 4 amos, right, and the 4 amos of her, is that talking about the airspace of the 4 amos, or maybe it has to land on the ground? So Tifshot the ein lein over. Say, well, the airspace seems to not count because we're saying if he throws it in her hand, it falls right. Her hand's on a slant, so it just kind of falls down, but doesn't actually hit the ground, even though it's in the airspace. She's not divorced. So Achav Mayaskinon be'omedes agava nohar to make her liibud koy. Well, here it's talking about where she was standing by a river. So even if it would land on the ground, it wouldn't be considered landing, I guess, on the ground, and therefore, I guess it would get, when it would land, and it would get like erased and get ruined. Like it wasn't really in a place where she was setting herself up for success. That even if it would land on the ground, it wouldn't work. So therefore, that is why it doesn't work. But I guess it sounds like you could say that if she was standing on the ground and it fell on the ground, and even if it got burnt up before it hit the ground, I guess possibly you could say that might be okay. Friends, that was Daf Ayin Ches of Masechta Gittin. I think it was a pretty interesting daf. We wrapped up the previous Mishnah, right? That if he gives her the get and she's in his bed, it doesn't work. But if it's her bed, we said it does work because if it's 10 tefachim tall and it's her own domain. We talked about if he gives her a get. And he says it's just like a financial document, or she grabs it from between his belt and his loins. So we saw machlokes between Rebbe and Reb Shimon ben Elazar. So Rebbe said that he just needs to say after the fact, "Hey Gittin, this is your get," and that's enough. Reb Shimon ben Elazar said no, he would have to take it back from her and re-give it to her. And then we learned this Mishnah about if he throws it to her. So if it's closer to her, so then it's then she's divorced. If it's closer to him, then she's not divorced. If it's somewhere in the middle, then it's a suffix. And we saw the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan that it has to do about if who can guard it, right? Even if it's closer to her, but she can't guard it, since she's not divorced, right? So it's considered closer to him if he can guard it and she can't. It's considered closer to her if she can guard it and he can't. And if they can both guard it, or if they both can't guard it, so then it's a suffix. Friends, that was the Ayin Ches of Masechta Gittin. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.